Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very proud to host today my special guest, Mr. Michael Meyer, who is a Swiss scholar and work as a consultant for different international businesses. Also, he is advisor to the head of European Institute at Zurich University. Good afternoon, Mr. Meyer, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So, Mr. Meyer, let's talk about Russian-Ukrainian war, because this is the main topic now, which penetrate all internal international politics, especially in Ukraine, but mostly in European continent. So what is the, let's say, Swiss perspective on this war, on Russian invasion into Ukraine?
I think in general, Switzerland, it's all about neutrality. And I think this is not only important for the government, but also the people that's just my experience, and, we are also, I think, a bit less affected by the war here. We had some inflation, of course, but I don't know the exact numbers, but I think it's maybe 3% or whatever. But, anyways, we have the strong currency here, so we were not that much affected by the war here in general. I think the people, of course, you can read it in the newspapers, etc., but we do not have so many internal debates. Like if you look at Germany, for instance, there is this constant debate about should we deliver these weapons? Should we send Leopard tanks to Ukraine? Should we now send the Taurus missiles to Ukraine? We just don't have it here. I think, so it's hard to define the Swiss perspective. In general, I think it didn't change that much. Switzerland, in my opinion, still tries to be as neutral as possible, let's say.
You're talking about Swiss neutrality, but at the same time, this is not generally about, let's say, the conflict which exists between Russia and Ukraine, because obviously we have a conflict which actually could be traced back to the collapse of Soviet Union. And this is, let's see, one side of the story. Another side of the story that we're now dealing with the general principle of international law. So does international law exist or not? Is it applicable to all states, or depending on number of forces which are in their possession? So this is the main issue. So what actually is the Swiss response to this danger to international law orders? So it's not, we're not dealing with, let's say, sympathy towards Ukraine. We're dealing with sympathy to international law.
I think for Switzerland, it's a very small country. And for such a small country, it's important that the other countries play by some rules or play by international law. Mm-hmm. So I think it's in the vital interest of Switzerland, to support the international law, etc., and to make sure that all the countries comply with this international law. So, but I think in general, in my opinion, international law, it's nice and it's nice to have, but it only makes sense if the countries play by the same rules. And I think with countries like Russia, we see that it makes no sense if they do not accept these rules. So, I also have an academic background, if you want so, but I'm very skeptical when it comes to international law, etc., and humanitarian law. Yeah. So, and you see, obviously, I think sometimes here in our countries, we are quite a bit naive, if you want so, So, because obviously, and this is not just, became not obvious just last year, with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. With Vladimir Putin, I think we saw this 2014, that obviously Russia is not willing to follow the rules, the international to play by the international law rules, if you want. And we just didn't. But we just didn't. I think for us it was too hard to accept this reality because we are so used to it, to play by the same rules, etc. So I think for us it was hard. It was not hard to see what's going on and hard to recognize it. It was just hard to accept what's going on.
Okay, so during the last several years, the world faced several challenges. The first one was pandemic. The second one was the Russian invasion into Ukraine. Even though Switzerland is far away from Ukraine, but still, as Mr. Friedman used to say, the world is a flat. So we basically live in one big flat. And what is happening in Ukraine quickly and swiftly can be, let's say, information about this can be delivered to Switzerland and vice versa. So Switzerland, as you told before, is a neutral country, and Switzerland during the history always benefited from being a neutral country. So bearing in mind that now we have, let's say, many challenges which are provoked by, let's say, globalization. Yeah? Does Switzerland think about, let's say, reassessing its policy, maybe accessing to European Union, and to become more open to European integration?
Yeah, what I can say in general is that I think there is no EU member state where people are talking so much about the European Union in general. So this is always a big topic here. When it comes to the question, how did it change here? I think it didn't change that much. I think this is just maybe a special, I don't know, for the Swiss mentality. But I think in Finland, in Sweden, you could see that, that they feel really threatened by the Russians. They share the borders. So for them, it makes totally sense to seek, how can you say, shelter under this NATO umbrella. In Switzerland, I think it's different, So this is why I think, we did not have this reaction that we had in Finland or Sweden, that the people say, okay, we are a small country, etc. We really should have some allies. Let's get closer to the European Union. I don't think so. In my opinion, it's just almost the opposite. That they say the Swiss approach is to, let's say, you see, the world is bad around us, so let's focus on us. This is So I think it was not very helpful for the EU-Swiss relations. And I think it's what I think is the case is that Switzerland, lost part of its reputation actually. Because I think countries like France, Germany, and the US, they are not happy, about when it comes to sanctions, to implementing the sanctions, etc. They are clearly not happy. And even today, I read in the newspapers, that Bill Browder, who invented this Magnitsky Act, I think, he regularly gives some interviews here in Swiss, newspapers, etc. And there you can clearly see that they are not happy, with what's going on here in Switzerland. So I would say for sure that the Ukraine war and all these events around it, it was not the result. Was not that Switzerland and the European Union now have closer relations.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Meyer, now, and actually we have discussed this topic before, we have this cancel culture, which relates not only to the, let's say, relations between man and woman, it also relates to some political topics, and including Russian-Ukrainian war. And we had the chance to read an interview which was given by Mr. Sarkozy to Le Figaro, where he stipulated that basically Ukraine should agree to conduct another referendums, international referendums on occupied territories, and acknowledge results and actually close this question. So basically, Sarkozy is calling to to acceptance of Russian invasion, Russian annexation of Ukrainian territories. And obviously, Sarkozy has left an office 15 years ago, or not 15, 10 years ago, but still he is a French politician. And let's say maybe what we have on Sarkozy's tongue, we can assume are on some, let's say, on some European officials' mind. So, do you see here a kind of threat that really, let's say, many European or Western politicians can think like Sarkozy? Because if you think so, then you would try to seek solution how to implement your, let's say, plan.
Yeah, this is a very interesting aspect that you mentioned here, in my opinion. And I think in general, of course, we have these politicians also in Germany, and not only like the alternative for Germany, like the Front National in Germany, if you want. So there it's obvious or to be expected, because they also have super close relations with Russian politicians, even get financed by Russian institutions. So there it is to be expected. But there is, for instance, this the governor of Sachsen-Anhalt, in Germany, and they are close. They sometimes it feels like they still have the Soviet mentality, in this part of Germany. And you could also hear these voices in Germany. And I think in general, this is also my biggest concern in this whole conflict. It's not about that the Russian army will attack us here in Germany. I don't expect this. But what I think is really a threat to us here is, imagine what would the situation look like, if Putin would be successful in Ukraine. Of course, I know Sarkozy, he and some German politicians, they just say, okay, let's give Crimea or some parts to Russia, and then we will stop the conflict. Okay, it's obvious that they know that their voters like it, because they are not willing to pay anymore for Ukraine. They have high inflation, etc. So yeah, first, what I want to mention in this context is, as far as I know, this solution makes absolutely no sense, because as long as the Russians, occupy Crimea, they can attack the whole Black Sea coast, which would be a disaster for Ukraine and for Ukrainian economy, as far as I know. And so it's, from this point of view, it's a bad idea. And then, as I said before, my biggest concern in this conflict is, imagine if Russia would be successful in this conflict, and this is where I think these politicians, this politics, would bring us to this point, then I think I can imagine that in this case, Putin and the people in the Kremlin, they would gain such a momentum, and then they would feel overconfidence, and then they could talk to our people, because if you listen to Putin's speeches, etc., he also always addresses, the voters in the US and the voters in Germany and the voters in France, and if they would be successful, maybe with the whole full-scale invasion, or maybe just with, having a Donetsk and Luhansk region, etc., and occupying Crimea, then they could talk to our people here and tell our people here, look, guys, I told you, it makes no sense for you to support Ukraine. You invested billions, you sent billions of US dollars and euros and whatever to Ukraine. You had inflation, you had no gas, etc. You see, your politicians, they are liars, they lied to you, and you see, we are successful. And you also remember that I told you guys that I won't stop in Ukraine, and that we want to see no NATO anymore in countries like Romania or Bulgaria, And in this scenario, so you mentioned Sarkozy before, when politicians like Sarkozy, create this debate in our countries. Huh? And then imagine Putin telling our people here, remember what I told you guys, then it's super easy. Then Putin, he could really threaten us here and without sending a single missile. But our people then, this is my concern, that they would go to the streets, massively and ask our government to, better let's give, I don't know, Romania back to Russia or whatever, or Poland back to Russia, but we don't want this anymore. And this is why I think it's super dangerous, what Sarkozy, etc., is talking about.
From the last year, we in Ukraine collect different promises given by different European states, that European states are going to rebuild Ukraine after the war. Ukrainian audience hear about massive investments which are going to enter Ukraine once the war is over. And we generally Ukrainians, they hope that these investments will come. Obviously, for let's say the citizen of Ukraine who live in Ukraine, even though he let's say doesn't understand anything in investments, or investments won't go to his pocket, for him is important because this is a kind of a sign of respect to Ukraine. But even though we hope that these promises will be fulfilled, but we know from the past that many promises which were given to Ukraine were not fulfilled. So it is important to, let's say, arrange our own plans in order to rebuild country, not relying on any help which can come or may not come. So what do you think about the reality of promises which are now given to Ukraine? Because when Ukraine is talking about, let's say, reparations from Russia, and Russia is going to cover all costs of damages which Russia caused to Ukraine, and West let's say will seize Russian property. I don't believe in this because Europe won't undermine this principle of, let's say, primacy of property rights, etc. So I don't believe in this, and I don't either believe in the golden reign which will go on, let's say, Ukraine after the war. So what do you think about this?
I think that, so forget about the reparations from Russia. Mm-hmm. You just cannot force them to pay. That makes no sense, as long as they have nuclear weapons, etc. So let's forget about it. And then I think in general, our countries here, they are, I think, very reliable partners for Ukraine. I think that that's also that we are really, that it's in our own interest, to support Ukraine in the long term, and mm-hmm. that Ukraine can really build a strong economy. So I also do not expect like the golden reign, as you said it. But I think that our governments, etc., that they are really willing to support Ukraine as much as possible. And but of course, I also do not expect like the golden reign. And I really like what you said, that Ukraine should be as independent as possible. And I think this is what many countries realize in the situation, even countries like Taiwan, Mm-hmm. In general, some people talk, I don't know if it's true or not, but you see this discourse on this deglobalization, etc. Even countries like Germany, I think we now realize that we should not depend on China, etc. too much. So I think this is just like a general learning. Unfortunately, now in Ukraine, we see this under very sad circumstances. But maybe this is really a big advantage for Ukraine in the long term, that you are suffering, unfortunately, now badly. But if you learn this message, I think this can be a super big asset for Ukraine in the long term.
And finally, I would like to ask you the following question. So, when we're talking about, let's say, not promises, but when we are talking about interests of the Western country to invest in Ukraine, obviously, Ukraine is a huge country with crafty people, and let's say we have many benefits, but still, let's say we lack something which is crucially important if we're talking about investments, because obviously Europe respects Ukraine for fighting against Russian invasion, but it's not enough when we're talking about investments, because money goes only if some certain rules are complied, and if, let's say, a safe institutional framework exists, like courts, like political system, labor law, etc. So, how do you assess now, as a consultant, Ukrainian state of affairs in terms of investment policy? If you put aside the respect which people now have towards Ukraine because of Russian invasion, so if you're talking about simply illegal economical let's say, points, how do you assess Ukrainian station?
I think from investors' point of view, the upside, is much bigger than the downside. I mean, what's the downside now for your investment? So that's and then I think that you mentioned these issues when it comes to this rule of law and corruption, etc. I think this is still a big issue in Ukraine, and maybe it's better now. It's hard for me to say it from here, but I just remember that the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine, they always have these really brilliant reports that they publish, and they ask the people, foreign investors and Ukrainian businessmen, what's the biggest issue? And I think still, when the war started, after 6 months, people still mention corruption as the biggest issue in Ukraine. Still bigger than the security issues, which I think is crazy. But and I also remember that we gave these lectures at the Odessa Law Academy. And I always ask the students, what they think, etc., and what really needs to be improved. And they all mention corruption, of course. And then we had this image, let's say, I told them that in my opinion, before the war, of course, it's like for having so much corruption in a country, it's really like having a body with a weak immune system, which is just weakened. And then if you get invaded, by a virus or the Russians, in this case, then you are not prepared, then it's hard to defend, and hard to fight them, hard to fight these invaders. So, and I hope that the people in Ukraine now realize, that they really have to get rid of this just too much corruption. Of course, we have it here in Switzerland, we have it in Germany. Maybe it's just different nuances, of corruption. But I think in Ukraine, it was still too much. What I can tell you is that when I traveled to Odessa some weeks ago, I really wanted to find out myself. And, there was such a beach club, basically. And I really wanted to go there to see how life goes on in Ukraine. And I have to say, by the way, that I was very, very, very much impressed by how the people try to live their life as good as possible. And of course, have fun as good as possible. Just to say it here, because some people here in our countries always say, yeah, but if they can go to restaurants, why do we need to send them money, etc. So I just went there, and it was fully booked. I was super happy to see that people are happy and that the place is just fully booked. And then I tried to ask to people, And I remember that before the war, some people told me, yeah, you can just ask a beach boy and give him 100 hryvnia, and then you will get a deck chair. And I tried it 3 times, and all three guys told me no. So you cannot like buy it here, you cannot like corrupt me. So, and I really wanted to see, and maybe it was just a coincidence, and they really didn't like me to ask this question. So maybe there is already some change in mentality. But the young people always told me that this is really on that they think the situation will only improve with the change of the generation. But I always was very optimistic for Ukraine. And I'm still very optimistic for Ukraine. You mentioned all the skills that the people have there. So yeah, I think corruption is a big issue, but I'm really optimistic that this situation will also get better in the long term.
Mr. Meyer, I appreciate an opportunity to take an interview from you, so thank you very much. Mr. Michael Meyer was today at our TV show, so thank you very much. And thank you all for watching us. Thank you.